The last reading came at 06:11. After that, the sensor feed was just empty. Lieutenant Okonkwo's hands shook as she ran the diagnostic for the 14th time. The 2,400 ships had crossed the Hollow's boundary at 06:00. She had watched them on the display: 14 dreadnoughts, 387 cruisers, almost 2,000 support vessels, 840,000 crew. She had counted them all. At 06:11, the feed went silent. Not a spike, not a jam, just nothing, as if the channel had never been connected. She checked the 340 sensor buoys, all operational. She checked the telescopes. The ships were still there on the optical, but the sensors showed no mass, no heat, no signal. "The sensors show they never existed," she said. Commander Vance pressed his scarred palm against the viewport glass. He did not look away. "Send the standard follow-up," he said. She looked at him. "There's no one to send it to," he said. "Send it anyway." The transmission left Hollow Watch at 06:12. 12 seconds of static on frequencies that had carried the same warning for 287 years. Vance watched the signal bleed into the dark. On his console, a chipped ceramic mug sat beside his hand, white with faded earth lilies, his grandmother's. The only thing on the station that did not belong to Earth Defense Command. He did not move. He kept his palm against the glass. The brown dwarf outside was dead, its light nothing but memory. Beyond it, the Hollow stretched starless and silent. He had been here 8 years. He had sent that warning 2,920 times. He had never expected anyone to cross it. But someone had. And now 2,400 ships had become the 848th entry in the file that no one read. But that silence, that was not the end. That was the moment the galaxy would finally listen if it knew how. Stay with me. That morning, at 600, the routine had been the same as every day for the past 3 years. Sergeant Darrow knelt on the deck of the observation gallery and polished his boots with a cloth that had once been white. The ritual took 7 minutes. He had done it 1,095 times. His left leg ached where the shrapnel had gone in, a souvenir from the volleys cluster, a dissolved unit, a quiet reassignment to a station where nothing ever happened. He rubbed the polish into the scuffed toe and thought about the dog tags around his neck. They had someone else's name on them now. He had stopped reading it years ago. At 06:15, Lieutenant Okonkwo settled into her console and pulled up the sensor logs. 14,000 hours of data, 0 anomalies. She skimmed the overnight sweep. The 340 buoys had reported nothing unusual. The dead brown dwarf still emitted its faint infrared whisper. The Hollow still returned no echoes. She noted a tiny blip on buoy 217, a fluctuation in the magnetometer, but the system had flagged it as cosmic noise. She dismissed it with a tap and moved on. At 06:30, Commander Vance walked in. He was 41 years old, gray at the temples, calm in a way that looked like indifference until you watched him make a decision. Then you saw the blade. He carried a cup of tea in a chipped white mug. The mug had lilies painted on it, faded to pale ghosts. His grandmother had given it to him before his first deployment. She had died while he was in transit. He had never replaced it. He set it on the console, next to the standard issue stylus, the emergency protocol manual, and a single photograph of a house on a hill that no longer existed. He sat down. He did not check the logs. He did not ask for status. He just looked at the viewport, at the brown dwarf's dead glow, and waited. He always waited. At 06:45, Chief Petty Officer HSU keyed the standard warning transmission test. 47 seconds of audio, the same frequencies, the same phrasing, the same calm tone. The message had been composed by the first commander of Hollow Watch 156 years ago. It had not been changed since. "This is Station Hollow Watch," the recording said. "The region beyond this point is designated a navigational exclusion. Vessels that cross the boundary do not return. No signals, no wreckage, no crew. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Turn back. The transmission echoed across the empty void, bounced off the dead star's gravity well and faded into the hollow. No reply ever came. It never had. Vance took a sip of his tea. It was cold, he didn't care. Darrow finished his boots and stood up, wincing slightly. He looked at the viewport. "You ever wonder if anyone's listening?" he asked. Vance didn't turn. "They listen," he said. "They just don't believe." "Same thing," Darrow said. Vance said nothing. He set down the mug and pulled up the long-range scan. A light blinked at the edge of the display, a fleet moving on a direct course for the boundary. He zoomed in. The readout identified it as Sarath Hegemony. 2,400 ships, 14 dreadnoughts, 387 cruisers, the rest support, 840,000 souls. He had been expecting this for 3 weeks. The diplomatic channels had been quiet. The hegemony had not responded to the standard notes. They had not acknowledged the exclusion. They had sent no requests for transit. They had simply assembled the largest fleet in conquered history and pointed it at the hollow. "We have 18 hours, he said. "They'll cross at 600 tomorrow." Okonkwo turned. "Are we going to do something?" Vance picked up his mug. He looked at the faded lilies. "We're going to send the warning," he said. "Same as always." HSU looked at him. "They've already received it. They have copies. They have the data. They know about the 847 ships that never came back." "Then they know what they're doing," Vance said, "and they know we will not stop them." "Why not?" Darrow asked. "We have weapons, we have protocols." Vance set the mug down. He pressed his scarred palm flat against the console. "Because the hollow is not a threat," he said. "It is a fact. You do not fight facts. You only warn people about them." He stood and walked to the viewport. The fleet was still a speck, but it was growing. "At 600 tomorrow they will cross. We will track them. We will record everything. And we will send the follow-up." "The follow-up?" Okonkwo asked. "The one that says we told you so," Vance said. "And then we will wait." He said it without anger, without triumph. He said it the way you say a tide will turn or the sun will rise. He said it because he had been saying it for 156 years. The whole station had been saying it, and no one had ever found a better answer. He reached for his mug. The tea had gone cold. He drank it anyway. Outside, the dead star cast no shadow. The hollow consumed all light. And somewhere in the dark, 2,400 ships were still 18 hours away from a line they could not see, would not respect, and would never return from. Vance knew that. He had known it since the first day he stood on this deck, but he also knew that knowing was not the same as being listened to. He looked at the console, at the faded lilies on his mug, and thought about his grandmother. She had taught him to draw those flowers. She had told him they grew in soil that remembered rain. He had never seen rain on the station. He had never seen soil. He had only seen the dark and the dead star and the ships that came and went and never came back. Tomorrow, another fleet would enter the file, and he would send the warning again. He wondered if anyone would finally listen. He stood at the viewport a long time after that. The dead star's faint glow painted nothing on the glass. Behind him, Okonkwo ran the sensor sweep again, and each time the display returned the same empty data. The fleet was still there, optical, but the numbers had stopped making sense. Vance turned, picked up his mug, and drank the cold tea. He set it down, walked to the console, and pulled up the long-range feed. The fleet had shaved another hour off the approach. He zoomed in on the lead ship, a dreadnought larger than any he had ever seen, its hull scarred with campaign markings. He said, "Bring up the Sarath Fleet Manifest." Okonkwo pulled it. The display filled with data, tonnage, reactor output, crew complements. Vance scanned past the figures and found the flagship's name, Indomitable Will. Grand Marshal Korath Ven, commanding. Vance knew the name. 23 campaigns, no losses. the hegemony's sharpest edge, the kind of commander who had never been told no. He said he's going to cross. You sound sure, Okonkwo said. I sound like I've read his file, Vance said. He's never seen a door that didn't open when he pushed. He sat down and typed a short message to Concord Command, fleet approaching. Request diplomatic override. He sent it without hope. The hegemony was a founding member. They didn't answer to border patrol. He reached for his mug again, then stopped. His scarred palm rested on the console. He thought about his grandmother, sitting by a window, drawing lilies with a pencil that was almost gone. She had said, "The trick to a good line is knowing when to stop drawing." He understood that now. Aboard the indomitable Will, Grand Marshal Korath Ven stood in the war chamber and watched the navigational display pulse with blue light. The chamber was low-ribbed, built from bone-dense hull plates that had absorbed the heat of many campaigns. The air smelled of heated ceramic and ozone, a scent he associated with victory. He was old, his skin the color of dried blood, his ridge plates calcified with age. His left eye had been replaced with tactical glass, a faceted black lens that gave him a permanent cold stare. He tapped the obsidian sigil on his breastplate and watched the fleet spread across the display, dreadnoughts, cruisers, support vessels. Thousands of ships, hundreds of thousands of souls. The communications officer said, "Grand Marshal, the border station has transmitted the standard warning again." "Play it," Ven said. The recording filled the chamber, calm, patient, human. "This is Station Hollow Watch. The region beyond this point is a navigational exclusion. Vessels that cross the boundary do not return. No signals, no wreckage, no crew. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Turn back." When it ended, Ven smiled. It was the smile of someone who had heard a child recite a rule they did not understand. "A statement of fact," he repeated. "From a species that has never commanded more than a border patrol. They have been warning the galaxy for 156 years. The records show many vessels have entered that region and not returned," the officer said. "Records are written by the timid," Ven said. "The Hollow is a region of space with unusual properties. The ships that entered were lost to equipment failure, navigation error, or cowardice. There is no mystery." He stepped closer to the display. The dead brown dwarf at the edge of the Hollow was just visible on the forward scanners, a cold ember. "Send a reply," he said. "Tell them we acknowledge their warning and we are proceeding." "Are we going to fire?" the officer asked. "No," Ven said. "We are going to cross. And when we return, we will bring that station's commander back in chains. He has wasted the galaxy's time with a lie." The officer sent the reply. Ven turned to the viewport and watched the starless dark ahead. He thought about his campaign sigils and the victory feast that would follow. He did not feel the cold. He had never felt it. On Hollow Watch, the hours moved like cold water. Vance did not sleep. He sat at his console, drinking cold tea, watching the fleet close the distance. Okonkwo kept running the sensors. Darrow stood guard at the observation deck, his boots gleaming under the dim lights. HSU maintained the communications array, ready to broadcast the warning again. At some point, Vance had stopped counting. Okonkwo said, "Commander, I'm getting something on buoy 217. Vance walked to her station. "What kind of something?" "A magnetometer fluctuation. It's been there since this morning. I dismissed it as noise, but it's growing. The amplitude is increasing as the fleet approaches." Vance looked at the data. The fluctuation was small, but it had a pattern, a pulse, like a heartbeat, repeating at regular intervals. "Is it coming from the fleet?" "No," Okonkwo said. "It's coming from the Hollow. The buoy is on the boundary line. The signal is emanating from the other side." The room went quiet. Darrow stopped polishing. HSU looked up. Vance said, "Run a diagnostic." Okonkwo did. The buoy was operational. The signal was real. It wasn't there before this morning. It started about the same time the fleet entered the system. Vance stared at the data. The pulse was steady, rhythmic, almost deliberate. He said, "Is it a communication?" "It doesn't match any known pattern," she said. "It's just a pulse." Vance thought about the hundreds of vessels that had crossed before. He thought about the silence that had followed each one. He said, "Keep monitoring. Tell me if the pattern changes." He walked back to his console, picked up his mug, and held it in his scarred palm. The lilies were almost invisible now, just ghosts of paint on white ceramic. He thought about his grandmother's words. The trick to a good line is knowing when to stop drawing. He had been drawing this line for 156 years. He knew when to stop. The question was whether anyone else would. The fleet was hours away when Ven called a command meeting. The war chamber was crowded with Sarath commanders in ceremonial plate. Ven stood at the center, his tactical glass eye scanning the room. "We are approaching the boundary," he said. "The station has issued its warning. We have acknowledged it. Are there any questions?" A young commander stepped forward. "Grand Marshal, the records of previous incursions." "Are irrelevant," Ven interrupted. "The previous incursions were conducted by species that lacked our resolve. We have never lost a fleet. We will not lose one today." "But the station has been operating for 156 years, without interruption. They must know something we don't." Ven tapped his obsidian sigil. "They know fear. Fear is not knowledge, it is the absence of knowledge." He turned to the display. "We will cross at dawn. We will map the hollow. We will return with data that proves the exclusion is a myth, and then we will dismantle that station." The commanders murmured assent. The young commander stepped back. Ven said, "Prepare the fleet for the crossing. Communications, send a final message to the station. Tell them we will see them on the other side." The message arrived on Hollow Watch an hour before dawn. Vance read it, then read it again. He set it aside and said, "Okonkwo, prepare the full sensor recording. HSU, keep the warning transmission running on a loop. Darrow, stand ready." "For what?" Darrow asked. "For the follow-up," Vance said. "When they cross, we send the follow-up." He stood and walked to the viewport. The fleet was visible now, a swarm of lights against the dead star's glow. The hollow was still dark, still silent, still waiting. Okonkwo said, "Commander, the magnetometer pulse is increasing." Vance turned. "How much?" "It's doubled in the last hour. It's accelerating." Vance walked to her console. The pulse was faster now, stronger, more defined. A sharp spike, then a long quiet, then another spike. Almost rhythmic, almost intentional. "Is it responding to the fleet's proximity?" he asked. "It seems to be," Okonkwo said. "As they get closer, the pulse gets stronger." Vance looked at the display. The fleet was still moving. The hollow was still dark. He thought about the pulse, and the silence, and the hundreds of vessels that had never returned. He thought about the warning he had sent, and the reply he had received, and the fact that he could not stop what was coming. He said, "Keep recording everything." He walked back to his console, sat down, and reached for his mug. His palm pressed against the scarred ceramic. He held it and waited. Dawn came without light. On Hollow Watch, the clocks marked the hour. The fleet had reached the boundary. Vance stood at the viewport, his mug in his hand, his scarred palm pressed against the glass. Okonkwo was at her station, recording. HSU was transmitting the warning on a continuous loop. Darrow stood at attention, his boots polished, his dog tags silent. The fleet crossed. Vance watched them do it. He watched the dreadnoughts, the cruisers, the support vessels, all of them, moving in perfect formation, crossing the invisible line that had been drawn on every chart in the known galaxy. He watched them enter the hollow. The sensors tracked them for a short while. Then the feed went quiet. Not static, not jamming, silence. Okonkwo ran the diagnostic. She checked the buoys, the telescopes, the beacons. She checked the magnetometer. The pulse had stopped. It had been there and then it was gone the same moment the fleet vanished. She said, "The sensors show they never existed." Vance did not turn from the viewport. "Send the follow-up." "There's no one to send it to." "Send it anyway." She sent it. The transmission left hollow watch, static on the same frequencies, carrying the same message that had been sent many times before. Vance watched the signal fade into the dark. He did not move. He kept his palm against the glass, his mug still in his other hand, his grandmother's lilies fading to nothing. The dead star cast no shadow. The hollow did not stir. He set the mug down. He said, "We wait." The silence spread across the conquered network. No transmissions, no questions, no orders. Just the weight of thousands of ships that had been there, and then were not. And in that silence, the galaxy finally stopped talking. It started listening. On the conquered observation deck, the silence held for 11 minutes. 200 delegates from 40 species did not move. They did not speak. They watched the display where the Sarath fleet had been, and where now there was only the dead brown dwarf and the starless dark beyond. The feed had not glitched. The sensors had not failed. The ships had simply stopped being there. Fen Orus was the first to break the quiet. He stepped away from the railing, his cinnamon-scented breath shallow, and turned to the volley delegation behind him. "Run the replay," he said. "Full bandwidth, slow it down." The technicians worked. The replay showed the fleet crossing the boundary, the sensors tracking their mass, their heat, their signals. Then, at the moment of crossing, the data became a flat line, not an interruption, not a spike, but a clean cut, as if the universe had decided those ships had never been part of it. Orus looked at Ilantas. She had not moved from the railing. Her brass compass was in her hand, the chain taut around her neck. She was staring at the display, her pale blue skin paler than usual. He said, "You knew this would happen." Tas did not look at him. "I knew what the records showed. I knew what I had observed. I did not know if the galaxy would believe me." "We believe you now," Orus said. Tas turned. Her eyes were deep-water dark, and they held something that was not satisfaction. It was grief. "Belief is not action," she said. "The fleet is gone. 800,000 souls. The hegemony will demand answers. They will demand someone to blame. They will not accept that the Hollow simply erased their armada without a cause." Orus said, "What cause could there be?" Tas gripped the compass. "I don't know. No one knows. That is the problem. We have stood at the edge of the Hollow for 156 years, and we have never understood what lies within. We only know that it does not tolerate entry." A volley delegate stepped forward, an older one, her ridge plates faded with time. She said, "The hegemony will not accept that. They will send a second fleet. They will demand the station be dismantled. They will accuse humanity of concealing a weapon." Orus said, "Humanity has no weapon. They have a warning." "That is what they will say," Tas said. "But the hegemony does not listen to warnings. They listen to power. And right now, the only power in this room is silence." She looked back at the display. "Send a transmission to Hollow Watch. I want to speak to Commander Vance." The transmission arrived on Hollow Watch 7 minutes later. Vance was still at the viewport, his palm against the glass, his mug cold on the console beside him. Okonkwo had stopped running diagnostics. There was nothing left to diagnose. Darrow stood in the corner, his boots still gleaming, his dog tag silent. HSU had turned off the warning loop. There was no one left to warn. When the screen lit up, Vance turned. The face that appeared was Korvathi, pale blue, deep-water eyes, a brass compass at her throat. "Commander Vance," she said, "I am Ilantas. I wrote the exclusion. I have been trying to stop this for 156 years. Vance said, "You're the cartographer." "I am," she said, "and I am sorry I could not make them listen." Vance looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I never expected them to. I just expected them to cross. And now they have. Tass said, what do you see now on your sensors? Vance looked at Okonkwo. She shook her head. Nothing. The magnetometer pulse stopped at the moment of crossing. It hasn't returned. Tass closed her eyes. It will return. It has done this before. The pulse was there when the first survey ships entered. It grew as they approached. It stopped when they vanished. And then, after a time, it began again. Vance said, what does it mean? I don't know, Tass said. I have spent 3 centuries trying to understand. I have cataloged every instance. The pattern is always the same, a pulse, then silence, then a longer silence. But what comes after, that is what we do not know. She opened her eyes. Commander, the conquered will convene within the hour. There will be demands. There will be blame. The hegemony will push for your station to be decommissioned. They will claim you knew more than you said. You must be prepared. Vance said, I have been prepared for 156 years. I am still here. Tass nodded. I will speak for you, but I am a map maker. They may not listen. They never listen, Vance said. But they watch, and right now they are watching. The screen went dark. Vance looked at his mug, at the faded lilies, at the photograph of the house on a hill that no longer existed. He picked up the mug, held it in his scarred palm, and walked back to the viewport. The hollow was still dark. The dead star still glowed. And somewhere in the silence, the galaxy was beginning to stir. The conquered convened at the hour. The hall was a vast curve of transparent aluminum, seats rising in tiers around a central dais. Delegates from every species filled the chamber, Vali, Korvathi, Sarath, and dozens more. The Sarath delegation sat in a tight cluster, their ridge plates stiff, their ceremonial armor gleaming. They had not spoken since the fleet vanished. The presiding officer, a Vali elder with white fur and tired eyes, called the session to order. We have witnessed an event without precedent, she said. A fleet of thousands has been lost in the navigational exclusion known as the Hollow. We have no debris, no signals, no survivors. We have only the record of the crossing, and the warning that was issued by Station Hollow Watch. A Sarath delegate rose, a young commander, his voice shaking. This is not an accident. This is an act of war. The humans have been guarding that border for a century and a half. They knew what would happen. They knew, and they did not warn us adequately. The presiding officer said, the humans issued the same warning they have issued for every vessel that has approached the boundary. The record is clear. They did not hide anything. They did not explain what is in the hollow, the Sarath delegate said. They did not tell us that crossing would result in annihilation. A human delegate rose, an older woman, silver-haired, wearing the plain uniform of Earth Defense Command. We told you what we know. We told you that vessels do not return. We told you that we have no explanation. We told you the truth. You chose not to believe. The Sarath delegate said, you chose to build a station on the border. You chose to guard it. You knew something. We knew nothing, the human said. We only knew how to warn. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, argued, gestured. The presiding officer called for order. In the upper tier, Fen Orus watched. He leaned toward Ilan Tass and said, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Tass said, it is going to get worse before it ends. Orus said, what happens when they send a second fleet? Tass looked at him. The same thing, unless we learn what the hollow is. Can we learn? We can try, she said. But every attempt to study the hollow has resulted in the same outcome. The sensors stop reporting. The probes vanish. The ships do not return. The only data we have is from the boundary line, the magnetometer pulse, the occasional fluctuation, the pattern that has repeated for centuries. She pulled the brass compass from her neck and held it in her palm. I have carried this compass for 300 years. It was given to me by the first survey team. They did not return. They sent this back before they crossed. It is all that remains. Oris looked at the compass. Its face was worn smooth, the needle still pointing, not north but toward the hollow, always toward the hollow. It never points away, Tass said. No matter where I go, it points to that dead star. It has never stopped. Oris said, that is not possible. And yet, Tass said. On Hollow Watch the hours passed. Vance had not slept. He sat at his console, his mug in his hand, his eyes on the sensor display. Okonkwo had fallen asleep at her station. She was young, her body needed rest, but Vance had not moved. He watched the dead star. He watched the hollow. He watched the line that had been crossed and had not been crossed back. At some point, HSU came to him. Commander, there's a transmission from the Concord. They want you to testify, live, before the full assembly. Vance said, when? In an hour. Vance nodded. He set down his mug, stood, and walked to the viewport. He pressed his scarred palm against the glass and looked out at the dark. He said, HSU, replay the warning. The standard one. HSU did. The recording filled the station, calm, patient, human. This is Station Hollow Watch. The region beyond this point is a navigational exclusion. Vessels that cross the boundary do not return. No signals, no wreckage, no crew. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Turn back. When it ended, Vance said, again. HSU played it again. Vance listened. He had heard it thousands of times. But now, after the crossing, after the silence, after the fleet had been erased, he heard something different. He heard the truth in it not as a warning but as a fact. The Hollow did not care who crossed. It did not care how many ships. It only responded to presence. He said, HSU, what happened to the magnetometer pulse? It still stopped, sir. Run a diagnostic on the buoy. Check for any change. HSU did. The buoy was operational. The pulse had not resumed. But there was something else, a tiny anomaly in the gravitational field. HSU said, Commander, I'm reading a fluctuation at the boundary. It's not the pulse. It's something new. Vance walked to her console. The fluctuation was faint, barely above the noise floor, but it was there, and it was growing. Is it coming from the hollow? He asked. Yes, HSU said, and it's moving toward us. The testimony began at the appointed hour. Vance stood in the small communications room on Hollow Watch, his image projected onto the dais of the Concord Hall. The chamber was full, delegates, observers, security officers. The Sarath delegation sat in the front row, their ridge plates rigid with fury. The presiding officer said, Commander Vance, you have been requested to explain the nature of the exclusion and the warning your station has issued. Please begin. Vance said, I will begin with the facts. The Hollow is a region of space approximately 2 light-years in diameter, centered on a dead brown dwarf. It has been charted for over 200 years. Every vessel that has entered it has failed to return. The exclusion was established by the Concord Cartographer's Office following the loss of 17 survey ships. The warning has been issued continuously since then. It has never been changed because we have never learned anything new. A Sarath delegate shouted, You expect us to believe you have learned nothing. You have been sitting on that border for 156 years. Vance said, Sitting is exactly what we have been doing. We watch. We record. We send the warning. That is the extent of our mission. We have no weapons. We have no research facilities. We have no answers. The delegate said, Then why are you there? Vance paused. He looked at the camera, at the hundreds of faces watching him. He thought about his grandmother, about the lilies, about the line she had taught him to draw. He said, We are there because someone has to be. Someone has to watch the line. Someone has to say, turn back, even when no one listens. That is what we do. That is all we do. The chamber was silent. The presiding officer said, Commander, is there anything else you wish to add? Vance said, "Yes, I have a reading on my sensors that I want to report. There is a gravitational fluctuation at the boundary. It is moving toward us. It is not the fleet. It is something else." The chamber erupted again. Delegates shouted, demanded clarification. The presiding officer called for calm. Tass rose from her seat, her voice cut through the noise. "I have seen this before. The fluctuation precedes the return of the magnetometer pulse. It is a pattern. The hollow is not passive. It is responding." The Sarath delegate said, "To what?" "To presence," Tass said. "To the fleet that crossed, to the void that was filled and now is empty again." The presiding officer said, "What do you recommend?" Tass looked at Vance's image. She said, "I recommend that we stop demanding answers and start observing. The hollow is not a threat to those who do not cross it. It is a boundary, and boundaries exist to be respected." The chamber fell into silence. Vance watched from hollow watch, his scarred palm resting on his console. He looked at the sensor display, at the fluctuation that was still growing, at the line that he had drawn and would continue to draw. He said, "I will send another warning." And he did. The second warning went out on the same frequencies, same phrasing, same calm tone. But this time it was directed at no one, at the fluctuation, at the hollow itself. "This is Station Hollow Watch. You are approaching the boundary. Vessels that cross do not return, turn back." The transmission faded into the dark. And the fluctuation stopped. It hung at the boundary, silent, waiting. Then slowly it retreated. HSU said, "Commander, it's going back, it's receding." Vance said, "Send the warning again." He sent it again. The fluctuation retreated further. Then, over the course of minutes, it vanished, not into the hollow but back to where it had come from. Okonkwo woke groggy and looked at the display. "What happened?" Vance said, "The hollow responded to the warning." "It responded?" "Yes," Vance said, "it listened." He picked up his mug, held it in his scarred palm and looked at the lilies. They were nearly gone now, just faint brushstrokes on white ceramic, but they were still there. He said, "The galaxy has been asking the wrong question. They have been asking what the hollow is. They should have been asking what it wants." Okonkwo said, "What does it want?" Vance said, "To be left alone." The conquered session adjourned without resolution. The delegates filed out, murmuring, uncertain. The Sarath delegation left in a tight cluster, their leader vowing to return with a second fleet. The human delegation stood in a corner, speaking in low voices. Fen Oris found Ilan Tass standing at the railing, her compass in her hand, pointing toward the dead star. He said, "You knew it would respond." "I suspected," she said. "The records show that the pulse always resumed after a crossing. But this time, Vance sent the warning and the pulse retreated. It has never done that before." Oris said, "What does that mean?" Tass said, "It means the hollow is not indifferent, it is aware, and it is listening." She turned to him, her deep-water eyes dark with something that might have been fear or might have been hope. "We have been standing at the edge of the hollow for centuries, treating it as a void. But it is not a void. It is a presence, and we do not know what it wants, only that it responds to warnings." Oris said, "Then we will continue to warn." Tass said, "Yes, we will continue, and we will hope that the hollow continues to listen." She looked down at her compass. The needle still pointed toward the dead star. It had not moved. She said, "I think the hollow is waiting for something." "For what?" "I don't know," Tass said. "But I think we will find out." Back on Hollow Watch, Vance stood alone at the viewport. The dead star still glowed. The hollow still stretched silent, but something had changed. The fluctuation had retreated, but it had not disappeared. It was still there at the edge of the sensors, waiting. Vance set his mug down. He pressed his scarred palm against the glass and looked out at the dark. He said, "I will keep sending the warning. I will keep watching. And if the hollow wants something, it will have to tell us. He thought about his grandmother, about the lilies, about the line she had taught him to draw. He thought about the fleet that had crossed and the silence that followed. He thought about the fluctuation that had listened and retreated. He said, "We are still here. We are still watching." And somewhere deep in the hollow, something stirred. The stirring became a presence. On Hollow Watch, the sensors began to register something that had never appeared before. Not a pulse, not a fluctuation, but a shape. A pattern in the gravitational field that was too organized to be natural. It moved slowly at first, then with purpose, crossing the boundary from the hollow toward the station. HSU saw it first. "Commander, the fluctuation is back. It's not retreating this time, it's coming toward us." Vance walked to the console. The display showed a distortion in the fabric of space, a ripple that grew as it approached. He said, "Speed." "Slow," Okonkwo said. "It's not a ship, it's not a weapon. It's like the space itself is moving." Vance pressed his scarred palm against the console. He looked at the data, at the pattern, at the way the ripple moved in a straight line, steady and deliberate. He said, "Send the warning." "Which warning?" "The same one. It listens. It responded before. It will respond again." Okonkwo keyed the transmission. The recording played calm, patient, human. "This is Station Hollow Watch. The region beyond this point is a navigational exclusion. Vessels that cross the boundary do not return. No signals, no wreckage, no crew. This is not a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. Turn back." The transmission faded. The ripple slowed. It did not stop, but it slowed. It hovered at the boundary, just beyond the buoy network, and it waited. Vance said, "It's listening." Okonkwo said, "What does it want?" "I don't know," Vance said, "but I think it's waiting for something we haven't said." He looked at his console, at the mug with the faded lilies, at the photograph of the house on a hill. He looked at his scarred palm, the scar from the academy, the training accident that had nearly cost him his hand. He had been told he would never fly again. Instead, he had been assigned to a station where nothing ever happened. Except now, something was happening. He said, "Open a channel, direct, no recording." Okonkwo opened it. Vance spoke directly into the void. "This is Commander Silas Vance. I am the commander of Hollow Watch. I have been here for 8 years. My grandmother taught me to draw lilies on a white cup. She taught me that the trick to a good line is knowing when to stop drawing. This is the line. We have drawn it for 156 years. We will not cross it. We ask only that you do not cross it either. That is all we ask." The ripple did not move. For a long moment there was silence. Then the ripple began to change. It did not retreat. It did not advance. It reshaped itself, from a distortion into something that looked almost like a signal. A series of pulses, spaced evenly, repeating in a pattern that matched the magnetometer pulse but inverted, as if the hollow were speaking in the same language but with different words. Okonkwo said, "It's responding, it's communicating." Vance watched the pattern. He said, "Record it, send it to the conquered. Tell them the hollow is not a void, it is a sentience. It has been listening to us for centuries, and now it is speaking back." The transmission reached the conquered within minutes. Fen Ora stood in the observation deck, watching the data stream from Hollow Watch. Ilan Tass was beside him, her brass compass in her hand, the needle still pointing toward the dead star. The pattern appeared on the display, a series of pulses, rhythmic and precise. Tass studied it, her deep-water eyes widening. She said, "This is the same pattern as the magnetometer pulse, but inverted. It's a mirror." Ora said, "It's responding to the warning." "It's responding to the warning," she said. "The hollow has heard us. It has acknowledged the boundary, and now it is saying." She paused. The pattern repeated, and she read it. "Turn back," she said. "Turn back and you will be safe. Cross and you will be unmade. That is the message. That has always been the message. We just could not understand it until now. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted, demanded explanations. The Sarath delegation rose to their feet, their ridge plates gleaming with anger. The young commander shouted, "This is a trick. The humans have created this signal to cover their crime." Tass turned to him. Her voice was cold. "I have studied the Hollow for 3 centuries. I have never seen a signal like this. This is not human technology. This is the Hollow itself, speaking to us in the only language it knows, the language of warning. The same warning that Commander Vance has been sending for 156 years. The same warning that we have ignored." She held up her compass. The needle still pointed toward the dead star. "This compass has never lied to me. It has always pointed toward the Hollow. It is pointing now. And it is telling me that the Hollow is aware and that it will not tolerate entry." The young commander said, "Then what do we do?" Tass looked at him. "We listen. We have been given a choice. We can continue to cross the line and be erased, or we can accept the boundary and live. The Hollow is not a weapon. It is a threshold, and thresholds exist to be recognized." The chamber fell silent. Aura stepped forward. "We should send a delegation to Hollow Watch. We should meet with Commander Vance. We should learn from the station that has been guarding this line for over a century. They have been right all along. It is time we admitted it." The presiding officer nodded. "The motion is carried. A delegation will depart for Hollow Watch immediately." The delegation arrived 7 hours later. 3 ships, Vali, Korvathi, and Sarath, docked at the station's small bay. The crew of Hollow Watch had never seen so many visitors. Darrow stood at attention, his boots polished, his dog tags silent. HSU and Okonkwo manned the consoles, recording everything. Vance met them at the airlock. He was not in formal uniform. He wore the same gray jacket he had worn every day for 8 years. His mug was in his hand. The lilies faded to near invisibility. Tass stepped forward first. "Commander Vance." "We have come to listen." Vance said, "Good, because I have something to show you." He led them to the sensor deck. The viewport faced the dead brown dwarf and the Hollow beyond. The ripple was still there, hovering at the boundary, patient and still. "This is what we have been guarding," Vance said. "Not a void, not a weapon. A presence. It has been here longer than any of us. It has been warning us in its own way, and we have been warning it in ours. We have been speaking the same language without realizing it." Tass said, "The signal, the pulses, that was the Hollow's voice." "Yes," Vance said. "It spoke to us through the magnetometer. It was saying the same thing we were saying. Turn back, don't cross. That is all it wanted. That is all it has ever wanted." He set his mug down on the console. The faded lilies faced the viewport. "We have spent centuries fearing the unknown," he said. "We have spent centuries trying to conquer it, map it, understand it. But the Hollow does not want to be understood. It wants to be respected. It drew a line. We are the only species that has ever respected it." He pressed his scarred palm against the glass. "I will keep sending the warning. I will keep guarding the line. And when the galaxy asks what we are protecting them from, I will say, from themselves, from the belief that every boundary must be crossed." The delegates stood in silence. Then Tass stepped forward. She held up her brass compass. "This compass has always pointed to the Hollow," she said. "I thought it was a relic of the past. I thought it was a reminder of what we had lost. But now I understand. It was pointing to the future, to the moment when we would finally listen." She looked at Vance. "Commander, I would like to ask you to remain at your post. We have many questions, but I think the first one is this. What would you like the Conquered to know about the Hollow?" Vance said, "I would like them to know that it is not a threat. It is a boundary, and boundaries are not about keeping things out. They are about defining what we are. We are the species that drew a line and stayed on one side of it. That is our greatest achievement." The Concord convened again 3 days later. The delegation from Hollow Watch testified. Tass presented the data. Oris spoke about the warning. The Sarath delegation, initially hostile, sat in silence as the evidence accumulated. The presiding officer said, "The Hollow has communicated with us. It has confirmed the exclusion. It has asked us to turn back. What is the will of the conquered?" The human delegate rose. The will of the conquered should be to acknowledge the boundary, to recognize that we have been wrong, to thank the crew of Hollow Watch for their patience, their vigilance, and their courage. The presiding officer said, "The motion is put to a vote." The vote was unanimous. 4,199 species voted to reinstate the exclusion. The Sarath delegation abstained. On Hollow Watch, Vance received the notification. He read it, then set it aside. He did not celebrate, he did not smile. He walked to the viewport, picked up his mug, and looked out at the dead star. The ripple was still there, hovering at the boundary. It had not moved since the day of the delegation. It was waiting, patient, silent. Vance said they listened. He pressed his scarred palm against the glass. "I don't know if they will always listen. I don't know if the next admiral will be as stubborn as I am. But I know this, the line is still here. The warning is still here. And as long as Hollow Watch exists, we will send it." He lifted his mug. The lilies were almost gone, just faint strokes of white on white ceramic, but they were still there. He said, "We will keep drawing the line." The years passed. The conquered did not forget. The exclusion remained in place. The hegemony did not send a second fleet. The Hollow did not stir again. Fenn Oris returned to the observation deck often. He watched the feed from Hollow Watch, the dead star, the silent void, the small station that had become the most important outpost in the galaxy. Ilan Tass wrote the final report. She was 340 years old now, and the brass compass still hung around her neck. She wrote, "The warning was issued. The warning was ignored. The warning remains in effect. We have learned that some lines are not meant to be crossed. We have learned that the courage to stand still is as valuable as the courage to advance. We have learned that the galaxy is not empty. It is filled with voices we did not know how to hear." She closed the report, set down her stylus, and looked at the compass. It still pointed to the Hollow. It would never stop. She thought about Vance, about his mug, about the lilies that had faded. She thought about the line he had drawn and the warning he had sent. She thought about the species that had listened, finally, after all these years. She said they were told where not to go. And on Hollow Watch, Commander Silas Vance, still at his post, still drinking cold tea, still watching the dead star, set his mug down and looked out at the dark. The Hollow was silent, the boundary was clear, the warning was still in place. He pressed his scarred palm against the glass. The viewport showed nothing but the dead star and the starless void beyond. He picked up his mug. The lilies had faded so far that only he remembered what they had been. He took a sip of cold tea. The line held.